Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time this week, we want to talk about how you actually physically pull a soil sample. And this is one of the big things we're often talking about here at Ag PhD, is doing more work yourself on your farm, and work that, isn't just for fun, it's work that actually pays you really good money. This is one of these $100 an hour jobs that we talk about quite often. It's how do you physically pull a soil sample.
You have to do things just right. So when you're out in the field to pull a soil sample, here's where it all begins. We want that soil probe to have a mark on it for exactly how deep you want to be. You have to have a consistent depth, otherwise you're going to have readings that really don't make sense going through your field. For example, let's say that we're pulling a 3-inch soil sample and then the next time we pull a 6-inch soil sample. Well, if you're getting further down into potentially some subsoil where there are less nutrients, you're going to really skew the results of what you're going to see. Where we're at on our farm is trying to pull mainly 6-inch soil samples. So what we do to make sure that we stay at that 6-inch depth is we'll actually take a grinder and grind a mark around our probe. That way we can see, hey, we just need to push it in until we get to that mark and then we stop. This way we can be at the same depth every time.
So going to the right depth is incredibly important. The other big thing that I'm always talking to people about when they're first getting started with soil sampling is keeping the probe straight up and down. And I know this seems maybe unimportant when you first think about it, but it's incredibly important because the different angle that you run each time, if you have a different angle, well, now you have a different soil depth that you may have ended up at. You may be pulling more from a certain depth, less from another depth. The point is we want to keep that probe straight up and down every single time. So go to the right depth, but keep that probe straight up and down every time.
Well, that's all fine and dandy, Brian, as long as the soil is dry. What happens when that soil is a little bit sticky? Well, things can get obviously a little sticky in that probe. So you have to make sure that you're getting all the soil out of the probe. You don't want soil hanging up and then all of a sudden you aren't getting much of a core from the next place you pull from. So a good way to do it, there's a couple of things here. First of all, you can use WD-40. Name brand WD-40 will not skew your soil test results. So you can spray your probe with WD-40 and that will help slide things out. The other thing that you could do is you could get a wood dowel. A wood dowel works pretty nice to just push the soil right out as needed and keep that probe clean. I've heard some people talk about having a bucket of water along and just every once in a while wash that probe out. That's something that you could consider doing too. Just know that there are going to be spots in fields, depending on the soil conditions out there, that could be a little sticky, so you have to be prepared when you're heading out.
Even with the water, if you get some of that water into your sample, that effectively could skew your data just slightly because there are things like calcium, magnesium, and a number of other nutrients in that water. Okay, the other thing that I always like to talk to people about when they're first getting going with this whole soil sampling thing is how exactly are you going to pull the cores? Where are you going to pull them from? So quite often we're talking about grid soil sampling. Now you can set up a zone too, but even if you set up a zone, we'd still like you to set grid points out in your field, or I could call it zone points out in your field, so you can repeat this whole process. We want to go back and sample from the same area in the same field again a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, and then find out how we're doing. That's really why we're doing soil sampling in the first place, is find out how we're doing. Do we have enough fertility? Are we depleting the soil? Whatever. So what I like to do is just drive right to the grid point. So we've got it marked GPS, I can repeat this, and I don't care if it's a four-wheeler or a pickup. What I do is I step out and I pull 2 cores on that side, I pull 2 cores in front, 2 cores on the other side, 2 cores in back. I've got all 8 cores. I just dump them in my bucket, and then I take my bucket, dump it in the sample bag, done. That's it. You don't have to do any mixing anymore. The soil lab will do mixing for you. So you can just throw it all together, and then the lab will take all those things, mix them together, and pull and properly run the sample.
What I like about that theory is you aren't overthinking things. You're not trying to make some fancy pattern out in the field. You aren't going to spend 20 minutes to get each core because you're trying to do all these fancy things. You're just going out and getting it done. Now, if you say, well, I've got a unique situation, maybe I've got a strip till band that's deep and it's every 30 inches out in my field, how do I account for that? Well, there's a couple things you could do. First of all, if you're putting a lot of nutrients down, let's just say at 10 inches deep, well, a 6-inch soil core is probably not the best way for you to go. Maybe you want to go with a 12-inch soil core. That way you make sure that you're hitting those fertility zones and accounting for them appropriately on your soil test. The other thing that you can do is one of two things. You could go within a row as you're pulling samples and just move over 3 inches, move over 3 inches, move over 3 inches, and every time you move, you're pulling another soil core. That way you're kind of getting a feel for the whole profile between one row and the next. Or you could do some sort of a zigzag pattern where you're pulling here and then you move up and skip a row and go over 3 inches, then you move up and skip another row and go over 6 inches, that kind of thing. So you can set up the program however you want to on your farm. Just try to be representative of the entire field in your samples.
Well, once again, how you actually pull the soil sample is incredibly important. We've got to have a representative sample if we're going to have good data in the end.
Well, another thing that's incredibly important is stopping our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how coming up later in the show.